What's the worst thing about living alone? Write in the comments. How would your life change if you lived alone all the time? Have fun watching. Story 1. The scariest thing about living alone, from my perspective, is the feeling of being left alone with oneself and one's thoughts, without support and understanding from others. When you face difficulties or problems and no one is there to support or help you, it can be incredibly terrifying. The feeling that there's no one who truly understands or listens to you can evoke a sense of despair and helplessness. Moreover, loneliness can amplify negative thoughts and emotions, such as anxiety, depression, and fear, and sometimes it feels like there's no way out of this vicious cycle. Story 2. For now, I guess, nothing. Kasi hindi ko pa naman naranasan. But I think if I experience that situation, siguro, the worst thing is wala akong mapagsasabihan ang thoughts ko. I need an opinion about everything, especially essay decision-making. I can't decide for myself. I feel like someone will judge me for the things that I do. So I think choosing someone to do that thing is much better. Sounds like a dependent person. Can't blame me. I always felt judged by anyone. Story 3. My life is a bit worse than living alone. I have 4 roommates that don't clean up after themselves. If I want to use the stove, I have to move dishes to the sink that aren't mine, clean it, and then it's usable. Living alone is the dream. It means I can watch TV on the couch and do laundry without texting people to please move their stuff, and then hoping in 3 days they'll do it. It means meal prepping and getting an entire freezer to myself. It means having a few herbs on the windowsill in the kitchen. But I do kind of live alone. I left for 2 weeks and no one noticed. If I don't leave my room for a few days, no one can tell. It is just me who cares about me. I have no one in under 100 miles that can help, and I have to handle it. Living alone is different if you have people around you, neighbors, friends, family, civil roommates, versus if it's just you. Story 4. The people hiding, just outside, planning a home invasion when I go to bed, or the ghosts and demons who haunt my place, especially at night in parts of the house I don't go to often. The various undead, recently died, ancient evil spirits that don't like me and aren't shy about letting me know by letting me catch just the slightest glimpse of them when I look down the hallway. The insane killer that escaped and saw my porch light and is waiting for a chance to break in, or maybe knowing I'll die here and no one will know or care for that matter, at least for several weeks, and no one to share the Kit Kat bar with. Story 5. U/platypus. 5309 mentioned a portion of it. Unsafe. You could fall and hit your head or slip in the shower or cut yourself, and nobody's around to find you. It's also inconvenient. I live with other people by choice. It's great. Hey man, I'm going to the shop. Need anything? Yeah, I'll have a can of soda water, please. All right, sure. This is all predicated on the assumption that the people you live with are good people. Like, hey, she bought a waffle iron. Now I can make waffles. Versus I bought a waffle iron and he left it plugged in. Now the non-stick surface is ruined. Story 6. Sometimes I wonder how long it would take before someone noticed that I had an accident and couldn't call anyone. My relatives lives on the other side of the country, so we only hear each other sporadically over the phone, so I can hardly rely on them. If I wasn't scheduled to be away on something in particular, my employer would probably assumed that I missed calling in sick, and I hardly sit around the clock chatting with my friends and acquaintances. It can even be a few days before we talk to each other. Now I'm also single, so I think it would take 2-3 days before someone actually missed me. Even longer if it was over the weekend. Story 7. You go home every day alone. No one is there. No one cares how your day went. No one ever says anything to you at home. No one ever says, good night. No one ever says, good morning. No one asks, are you okay? No one asks, are you choking? No one stops you from choking. No one cares when you are gone. Story 8. Health scare with no support, especially when struggling financially and having to struggle on the job too because of shit cultures, and you already have years of trauma to finally work through. Everything could be handled, but once in my case at least, had a health scare, I realized how alone I was, despite treasuring my aloneness otherwise. Story 9. I lived alone for about 7 months now. I have a full-time job and starting a business, so I stay busy all the time. I have never felt so much at peace, especially with leaving with roommates for the last 7 years. I'm so glad I live alone. Like I always say, I'm alone, but never felt lonely. I enjoy my company. Only problem is maybe sometimes I feel like I'm becoming antisocial and hate being around too many people. Story 10. For me, it's when I'm sick. I had gotten severely ill in fall of 2020 due to a sinus infection, and it was really hard to get out of bed to take meds, make a meal, or even going to pick up my DoorDash delivery downstairs, driving myself back to urgent care, etc. It sucked trying to muster up any energy to do those basics things. I thought about getting old age and how well I'd be able to look after myself when I get sick. Other than that, living alone is great emo. Story 11, I think. I've started to depend on the loneliness, which is probably not a good thing. Been living alone for 2 years now. It gets lonely some days, but then the thought of having someone over also becomes overwhelming, so I'd rather go through it alone. I look forward to being alone after being out, even for a little bit. As much as I like having my friends BF over, I become restless after a while and can't wait for them to leave. Story 12. Nobody hears you when you have an accident like slipping in the bathtub. I'm living alone for about 6 years now, and my biggest fear is that something happens and I'm unable to get help by myself. 2 relatives already died this way because they had been found too late. I gave some friends a key so they could enter if they want, but we don't speak daily, so it would still take days, weeks, or months until someone would go into my living space. Story 13. Having to do everything yourself. Nobody cooks for me. I do all the cooking. I also do all the laundry. I shovel the walks when it snows and mow the grass when it gets long. I clean all the dishes and do all the cleaning. And if I'm not around, it doesn't get done. Juxtapose that with my married friends who can go to work, put in a full day's worth of work, and come home and relax knowing dinner will be ready when they get home and any laundry or cleaning up will probably also be done. And that's just the basics. Don't even get me started on running errands or groceries. Story 14. Most of the time, living alone is great, but sometimes it's got its significant downsides. For example, for my job last year, I had to have my I-9 identity verification documents confirmed by someone in person and signed off on, since I worked remotely. I got an overwhelming feeling of loneliness when I didn't have a roommate, partner, or even nearby friend who could do that for me. Later that week, I slipped and almost fell in the shower in S-way, where I would have absolutely broken something and likely knocked myself out. It hit me even harder that living alone means that I'm alone. If I get hurt, I've got no one there to help me. And hell, if I died, my parents probably wouldn't know about it for weeks. In addition to all of that, I just moved to a new place. I'm on the 3rd floor. I'm looking into buying some new tables and other small furniture. There's no one there to help me even get it up the stairs, let alone move it around if I need to. Living alone means that I don't have to share my space or my privacy, but it also means I'm asterisk alone. Story 15. Let's say you have a medical emergency, and you have to go to the hospital for a couple of days or even an ER overnight. There's a very good chance there's nobody to look after the animals in the house, apartment. You have friends until you need your friends to come over to feed anything with more legs than your individual friends have. And if you think that annoying friend who forgets to flush the toilet when they come to your house for a party is going to change the cat litter or the bottom of the bird cage or even the hamster shavings, you might have that hospital stay extended for a psych test. Story 16. I have 2. Getting sick and winding up bedridden for days. You never realize how nice it is to have someone there to bring you medicine and water and food until you're incapable of doing it alone. On a darker note, being entirely alone when something bad happens in your life. I was alone the night I got the call that my grandma had a heart attack and most likely wouldn't make it. This was the end of the lockdowns, but since one of my co-workers had COVID, I couldn't go be with my family until my test results came back. Being alone in the 3 days that followed was like my own personal hell. Story 17. You will need more free time because you need to cook, wash your clothes, clean the apartment. I used to live with my mother, so most of the time, those things weren't bothering me. And when my mom moved to another place, it takes some time to get used to it, especially because I'm very lazy. And don't forget to lock the front door. Story 18. Sometimes the solitude feels more like isolation. That was my experience during the pandemic. I lived alone, and it was fine when I was working around people all the time. Then we went fully remote during the pandemic, and suddenly the only time I was around other humans was on work-related Zoom calls. It was fine for a few months, but eventually the long periods spent alone started to feel heavy. I ended up buying a house with a family member just to have someone there. Don't regret it at all. Still fully remote, but now I have another real live human to interact with as well. Story 19. I was lucky to live alone through college, and only moved in with my now fiancé 3 years ago. If I was still living alone, I absolutely wouldn't be able to handle the cost of living in the same city, which would impact my life considerably. Sometimes I miss all the alone time and freedom I used to have. No endless coordinating what we'll be cooking today and who does what chore, and having to manage 2 schedules, but in retrospect, I was also very lonely and undertouched. I had, and still have, great friends that I saw several times a week, and we'd always hug it out. But you don't really call friends at 3 a.m. to come over and cuddle you and give you head scritches because you're lonely and everything is horrible. Story 20. At what age are we talking about here? Younger me, lack of sex, pre-HIV, straight woman. Married 37 wires, then he passed 6 weeks ago. While I am very comfortable doing all things on my own, the silence is strong. Also, my fear of falling or tripping, at 64, and not being found for hours or a day is very high. This was only a minor concern when hubby was alive, but wow, it's really front and center now. Good news, putting in safety bars and rails is a pretty easy solution for my handyman. Turning on the TV also helps. Story 21. To me, the worst thing about living alone is the reflection of the cleanliness of your space to your mental state. I had a long run with a girl I really loved. I moved out on my own to work a new job and get my degree at the same time. I'd work long hours and study through the night. I ended up neglecting my space and neglecting her. She left. That feeling of coming home to nothing, and that nothing being messy when you return, is the hardest punch to the mind you can face. Once is no biggie, but when it's every day, it really wears down on you. Whenever I think about this, I'm reminded of a speech Admiral William H. McRaven gave. If by chance you have a miserable day, you will come home to a bed that is made, that you made, and a made bed gives you encouragement that tomorrow will be better. If you live alone and you struggle with it, I'm with you. No one's looking if things are messy. But if you can clean up and take care of your space, at least you'll have yourself from a couple hours ago to thank and feel the presence of. 3. Now for me to take my own advice and clean up around here. Story 22. The challenging part is the cooking, now that I'm getting older. Meal prep or meals that have been pre-cooked previously does not go well with me anymore. My palate is looking for a hot meal, and I don't want to reheat or eat pre-cooked, prepped meals or leftovers. This increases my food budget since I would rather buy from restaurants rather than eat the food that I have in my fridge. Story 23. My husband did 3 months of travel nursing during COVID, and it was the first time I had ever lived by myself. The worst thing about being alone for me was weight gain. You get bored from being alone, you drink and eat more. You feel sad, you eat snacks, and there's no one to hold you accountable. You take bubble baths in the middle of the day with a whole bottle of mimosas. I gained 20 pounds in those 3 months. Story 24. Being alone, all the what-ifs if anything was to happen. I got COVID on 2 occasions. Whether sitting up or laying down, I always felt as if I was drowning. One point the power went put for 2 days because I couldn't get out to go pay it. My apartment reached over 100-degree F. I really thought I was going to die. At one point I just laid in bed and waited, cried, made peace, and fell asleep, expecting not to wake up again. My ex found me covered in vomit. Luckily, she had a key and was worried. I never asked her what drove her to stop by. I'm forever grateful. Story 25. For many people, the worst thing about living alone is the feeling of loneliness and isolation. While some may enjoy the peace and independence that come with living solo, others may find themselves longing for companionship and social interaction. Without roommates or family members nearby, there may be no one to share daily experiences with, celebrate successes, or provide support during difficult times. Additionally, living alone can sometimes lead to feelings of vulnerability, especially during emergencies or times of illness when there is no one immediately available to help. Story 26. Loneliness. I've been alone for 6-7 years now. I left the city when I got my 100% rating through the VA and live alone in the woods near to where I grew up. I've always had a million hobbies and ADHD, so I have a million conversations with myself, but eventually, it always gets lonely. Drinking beer and eating shitty food is the easiest way to cope with about anything, and that led to me weighing nearly 300 lbs. I'm 6'1". I had actually become a diabetic and didn't know, till I woke up one night having a stroke. It sounds funny, but I couldn't remember how to use a phone at the time, so I drove myself to the hospital nearly an hour away. That will be 2 years ago on 9/11. Now I hike and bike constantly. Diabetes is gone and I'm down 60 pounds. I have a girlfriend. I can't wait to live together and have no free time or privacy. Haha, talking to her and her daughter are the highlight of my days. For me, the loneliness is worse than anything. Every funny thought, every beautiful hike, every sunset, film, book, meal, whether delicious or terrible, I experience alone. Holidays are especially cruel. My life experience is wholly solipsistic and it sucks. Life feels pointless without someone around to care for, someone to touch you and remind you that it's all real, someone to laugh at my dumb jokes. Story 27. I lived alone for 3 years between my last relationship ending and my current one beginning. I am an introvert, so I was in hog heaven. My time was my own TV shows, my own video games. If I got a craving for a burger, I would hit up a drive-thru and eat that bad boy in my car. But even as an introvert, You need human interaction. My anxiety makes it a challenge to go where people gather, bars and such. I would sometimes dine out alone and converse with my waiter or waitress to fill that social meter. I would say, though, that going to bed at night was sometimes the hardest part. No one to snuggle with, no one to kiss goodnight, no lovemaking, and no one to greet the sunrise with you. After time, those moments can really weigh you down. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, like it. Be sure to write comments and share your stories.